Hello, my wonderful and beautiful friends. Welcome back to our story time. I don't work here, unlike Karen, who seems to think that everyone on Earth exists to serve her. In today's episode, we'll dive into some annoying Karens as an OP shares a story about a Karen who deeply regretted messing with her. I hope you enjoy these stories, just don't shake your head too hard. And as always, you can send or link your posts to this email right here. Let's get started. Story 1. First up, we have a story from r/IDontWorkHereLady, a place where an overconfident nose can turn a simple shopping trip into an endless comedy. This time, OP shares a mix-up so ridiculous that I just want to scream, Karen, how do you even manage to embarrass yourself this badly? OP, an average guy, had just finished his shift and stopped by a grocery store, a typical place with narrow aisles stacked high with cereal boxes, the scent of freshly baked bread blending with the aroma of roasted coffee, shopping carts clanking against glossy tile floors, and the PA system announcing a discount on beef at 6 p.m. OP writes, I had been working at a construction site all day, covered in sweat, just wanting to grab some cold cuts, bread, and a chilled beer before heading home to relax, only to be mistaken for an employee because of my body odor. The main character of this drama is Karen, an elderly customer whom OP describes as about 60 years old, silver hair neatly tied in a bun like a fairy tale grandma, wearing a thick brown sweater despite the 30-degree heat, pushing a cart overloaded with everything from soup cans and potato chips to soda bottles stacked haphazardly. Her voice? As shrill as a broken fire alarm. OP continues. She looked me up and down, sniffed the air like a bloodhound, and then confidently declared that I worked there, so I decided to play along for a bit before bursting her bubble. All OP wanted was to go home, crash on the couch, and watch Netflix, but Karen's mistaken identity case set the stage for a hilarious back and forth that had me shaking my head and laughing at the same time. Story 2. Next, we dive into r/IDontWorkHereLady, where a stranger's arrogance can turn a peaceful afternoon into an endless comedy show. This time, OP shares a hilarious case of mistaken identity that made me want to scream, Mrs. D, you did this to yourself. OP is just a regular guy out shopping at a home goods store, a place lined with towering shelves stacked with gleaming pots and pans, the scent of fresh plastic from blenders mixing with the soft background music from wall speakers, and the steady beeping of barcode scanners amidst the rustling of customers rummaging through items. OP writes, I stopped by the store to buy a new frying pan after my old one got burned beyond repair. I just wanted to get in and out quickly, never expecting to be mistaken for an employee and nearly fired on the spot. The protagonist of this hilarious drama? Mrs. D, a middle-aged customer, whom OP describes as around 45 years old, with curly, fire-red dyed hair, a loud floral blouse that looked like curtain fabric, oversized glasses sliding down her nose, a voice like a broken public announcement speaker, and an attitude like she owned the whole store. OP recounts. Mrs. D took one look at me, decided I was an employee because I was holding a frying pan, and demanded to have me fired for not helping her. And I thought, why not have a little fun before snapping her out of it? All OP wanted was to buy a frying pan and head home to cook, but Mrs. D's entitled behavior set the stage for a brilliant exchange that had me clapping. This is a story about frying pans, arrogance, and a satisfying lesson. Are you ready? Buckle up, because Mrs. D is about to dig her own grave with her own words, and OP is about to make you laugh for the next 30 minutes. The drama unfolds on a busy Saturday afternoon, with the store packed with weekend shoppers. OP writes, I just got paid and decided to upgrade my old frying pan. It was pitch black from the last time I forgot to turn off the stove. I was wearing a dark blue t-shirt and faded jeans, holding a shiny stainless steel frying pan, pacing between two shelves comparing prices. One was $8, the other was $10, when Mrs. D appeared. She was pushing a cart loaded with a pressure cooker, a mixer, and several wooden cutting boards. The cart creaked under the weight as she stopped right next to OP, stared at him, and suddenly barked. Hey! You there! Get me that blender from the top shelf. OP froze, still holding the frying pan. Ma'am, I don't work here. Mrs. D narrowed her eyes, her voice turning sharp. Don't lie to me. You're holding a pan, standing here in the store, you're obviously an employee. Now get me that blender. OP writes. I stared at the frying pan in my hand, barely holding back laughter, and thought, all right, if she wants me to be an employee, I'll play along. At this point, I wanted to scream, Mrs. D, since when does holding a pan make someone an employee? The situation escalates as Mrs. D refuses to believe OP and essentially makes him her personal employee. OP writes. I shrugged and smiled slightly. All right, let me get that for you. I put my frying pan down, reached up for the small blender near me, and handed it to her. She nodded approvingly, as if she had just hired free labor. Good, now go get me a knife set from aisle 5. Quickly, I don't have all day. OP turned to her, deadpan. Ma'am, I really don't work here. I'm just buying a pan. Mrs. D snapped, her voice overpowering the store's background music and a commercial about a discount sale. Stop pretending. I saw you working. What kind of lazy employee are you? Go get the knives now. OP writes. I looked around, some customers were now watching, including a man holding a coffee maker shaking his head and a woman with a full cart giggling. I thought, all right, she wants an employee. I'll give her the employee experience, my way. Instead of going to aisle 5, OP casually strolled down aisle 6, picked up a stainless steel ladle for himself, admired some discounted pressure cookers, and returned 7 minutes later. Mrs. D was standing by the blenders, hands on her hips, her face bright red. Where's my knife set? What took you so long? OP shrugged and held up the ladle. Oh, they were out of knives. But look, I got a ladle instead. At this point, I was thinking, OP, you're trolling slowly but surely. Mrs. D is about to lose her mind. OP wasn't done. He cranked up the confusion until Mrs. D completely unraveled. Mrs. D turned purple with rage and screamed, You're the worst employee I've ever seen. Get me your manager now, I'm having you fired. OP laughed. Go ahead and call them, ma'am. I'm not an employee, so I can't. Mrs. D stormed off, her overloaded cart squeaking as she slammed it into the customer service desk, pounding on the counter. Where's the manager? Your employee is lazy, refuses to work, and needs to be fired. A real employee, wearing a red uniform with a name tag reading hung, emerged from the returns desk. What seems to be the problem, ma'am? Mrs. D pointed straight at OP, who was now back to comparing frying pans. This one. He wouldn't get my knife set. Fire him. Hung blinked, looked OP up and down, dark blue t-shirt, no name tag, holding a frying pan, and asked. Sir, do you work here? OP shook his head and raised the pan. Nope. Just shopping. She's mistaken. OP writes. Mrs. D froze, her mouth hanging open. Hung burst into laughter like he had just heard the joke of the week. Ma'am, he's a customer. He doesn't work here. Customers around them chuckled, and one woman pushing a cart full of pots laughed. It was obvious he wasn't an employee. This is hilarious. Even a guy in a motorcycle helmet added. Real employees wear uniforms, this guy looks like he's about to cook dinner. OP writes, at this point, Mrs. D had effectively stranded herself in the middle of the store without realizing it. Absolute comedy gold. Desperate to save face, Mrs. D doubled down. Why didn't you say so from the start? You wasted my time. Lazy good for nothing. OP, still inspecting his frying pan, casually replied. I told you 3 times, but you didn't believe me. Also, I don't work here, so, who are you going to complain to? Mrs. D turned to Hung. Are you the manager? Fire him. Hung smirked. Nope. And again, he's not an employee. At this point, the actual store manager, a woman in a red shirt named Lon, walked over. What's going on here? Mrs. D pointed at OP. This one won't do his job. Fire him. Lon looked at OP, then at the frying pan in his hands, and chuckled. Ma'am, he's a customer. You've got the wrong guy. The entire store erupted in laughter. Even a random man shouted. You're trying to fire a customer? That's comedy gold. Long story short, Mrs. D left humiliated. OP bought his frying pan, and now he jokes. Whenever I go shopping, I make sure not to hold a frying pan, just in case someone tries to fire me again. So, whose side are you on? Ever been mistaken for an employee? Tell me your story. Story 3. Next up, we have a gem from our /IDontWorkHereLady, where a simple misunderstanding can escalate into a legendary showdown thanks to overconfidence. This time, OP shares a mix-up so absurd that I wanted to shout, "Dude, you did this to yourself." OP was just a regular customer visiting a sporting goods store, a place with shelves full of gleaming sneakers, the smell of fresh rubber from basketballs blending with the upbeat pop music blasting from ceiling speakers, and customers thumping their new shoes against the wooden floor. OP wrote, I went in to buy a new pair of running shoes, coincidentally wore a shirt similar to the employees, got mistaken for staff, and turned the situation into the sweetest revenge, all thanks to knowing the manager. The main character of this drama? A self-important customer we'll call Mr. E. OP describes him as about 40, wearing a tight striped polo that stretched over his belly, hair slicked back with gel, sunglasses indoors, speaking loudly like he was delivering a speech, and carrying the attitude of someone who thought he owned the world. OP continues, E took one look at me, decided I was an employee because of my shirt, and then tried to fire me, without realizing I actually knew the manager. And I used that fact to teach him a lesson. All OP wanted was a pair of shoes to test on the treadmill at home. But Mr. E's entitlement set the stage for a hilarious showdown that had me clapping. This is a story of sneakers, arrogance, and a sweet, sweet twist. Are you ready? Buckle up, because Mr. E is about to dig his own grave with his mouth, and OP is going to have you laughing for the next half hour. The incident took place on a busy Sunday afternoon, when the store was packed with weekend shoppers. OP wrote, I had just finished my morning run and decided to drop by for a new pair of shoes since my old ones were falling apart. I was wearing a plain red t-shirt, coincidentally the same color as the employee uniforms, but no name tag, no logo, just a cheap shirt from the market. I was standing in the sneaker aisle, holding a pair of white running shoes, checking out the rubber sole when Mr. E appeared. Mr. E, pushing a shopping cart loaded with a basketball, wristbands, and boxing gloves, the cart rattling due to a loose wheel, stopped right next to OP, stared at him, and barked, Hey, you! Get me a size 10 from that top shelf. OP was momentarily confused, turned around, still holding the sneakers. I don't work here, sir. Mr. E frowned, voice turning sharp, Don't lie. You're wearing red, you're holding shoes, you're obviously an employee. Just get the damn shoes. OP wrote, I looked down at my red shirt, listened to this guy making up facts, and nearly laughed out loud. I thought, alright, buddy, you want me to be an employee? Let's play along a little. At this point, I wanted to scream, Mr. E, since when does wearing red automatically mean your staff? Since Mr. E refused to believe OP, he doubled down on his authority. OP wrote, I shrugged, smiled slightly, and said, Sure, let me check. I put the shoes back, reached up, grabbed a size 10, it was literally right there, handed it to him. He nodded, satisfied, as if he had just found a new servant. Then, Mr. E took it up a notch, Great. Now go grab me a premium basketball from aisle 3. Hurry up, I don't have all day. OP turned, keeping a straight face, Sir, I really don't work here. I'm just buying shoes. Mr. E immediately snapped, his voice booming over the pop music, Stop pretending. I saw you working. You're just lazy, now go get the damn basketball. OP wrote, I glanced around and noticed a few customers watching. An older man shaking his head, a teenager trying on sneakers snickering. I thought, alright, buddy, you want service? You'll get it, my way. Instead of going to aisle 3, OP casually strolled to aisle 4, picked up a pack of sports socks for himself, browsed the discounted gym shirts for a while, and only returned after 5 minutes. Mr. E was waiting at the shoe rack, hands on his hips, face turning red. "Where's the basketball? What took you so long?" OP nonchalantly held up the socks. "Oh, they're out of the premium ones. Also, I still don't work here." At this point, I was thinking, OP, you're trolling at a slow, delicious pace, and Mr. E is about to lose it. Now thoroughly enraged, Mr. E shouted, "You're the worst employee ever. Call the manager. Now." OP grinned, "You call them. I don't work here, so I can't." Fuming, Mr. E stomped over to the customer service desk, pushing his rattling cart, slamming his hands on the counter. "Where's the manager? This lazy employee refuses to work, fire him immediately." A real employee, wearing an actual uniform with a name tag that read "My," walked over, headset on, looking confused. "What's going on?" Mr. E jabbed a finger at OP, who was still holding his sneakers and socks. "This guy won't do his job. Fire him." My blinked, looked OP up and down, no logo, holding shopping items, and asked, "Sir, do you work here?" OP held up his shoes. "Nope. Just shopping." "He's mistaken." Mr. E's mouth dropped open. I chuckled, "Sir, he's a customer. He doesn't work here." Nearby customers giggled. An older man pushing a cart laughed. "It's obvious he's not staff." A teen wearing a baseball cap added, "Real employees wear name tags. This dude looks like he's about to go for a run." At this point, I was howling, "OP, you made him drown in his own assumptions without even trying." Still in denial, Mr. E turned back to OP, furious. "Why didn't you say so from the start? You wasted my time, lazy idiot. I'm reporting you to the manager." OP smirked, tapped his shoes against the floor, and said, "I told you 3 times. You didn't listen. Also, I do know the manager. Let me call her for you." Mr. E scoffed, "Yeah, right. Call her. Watch as you get fired." OP dialed a number, and out walked Lynn, the actual store manager and OP's high school friend. She looked at OP, then at Mr. E, and burst out laughing. "Oh, so this is the guy who tried to fire my friend?" Customers erupted in laughter. I grinned. "He shops here all the time. He's not an employee." The older man shouted, "The guy actually knows the manager? Mr. E, you're done for." Mr. E, utterly humiliated, mumbled something about the store being terrible and pushed his cart away, only to crash into a display of basketballs, sending them bouncing everywhere. OP, I left with my sneakers, socks, and a free comedy show. The internet exploded. So, what do you think? Did OP handle it brilliantly, or is Mr. E just a tragic fool? Story 4. Next up, we have a tale from r/IDontWorkHereLady, a subreddit where a simple misunderstanding can escalate into a hilarious showdown, thanks to a customer's stubborn insistence. This time, OP, the original poster, shares a drama that had me shouting, "Gee, girl, why are you doing this to yourself?" OP is just a regular person, casually browsing a furniture store, the kind with towering shelves stacked with leather sofas, the scent of new wood from dining tables blending with soft background music, and the occasional creaking of chairs as customers test them out, accompanied by the clatter of carts pushed by employees. OP writes, "I stopped by the store to look for a small table for my living room, just wanted to take a quick look and leave, but somehow got mistaken for an employee and decided to dive headfirst into trouble just to troll the person who made the mistake." The drama's main character? A woman we'll call Ms. G, a customer with an overinflated sense of confidence. OP describes her as about 35 years old, with a bob haircut highlighted in brown, wearing a long trench coat despite the comfortably cool indoor temperature, carrying an oversized handbag, and speaking in a voice as sharp as a paper cutter, with an attitude that screams, "I am an interior design expert." OP recounts, "Ms. G took one look at me, decided I was an employee just because I was standing near a table, and demanded my help, so I chose to troll her by pretending to be the worst employee ever. All OP wanted was to find a table and go home, but Ms. G's mistake paved the way for a legendary showdown that had me clapping while laughing. This is a story about wooden tables, misplaced arrogance, and a sweet, sweet troll. Are you ready? Buckle up, because Ms. G is about to dig herself into a hole with her own misguided persistence, and OP is going to have you laughing for the next 30 minutes. It all started on a quiet Wednesday afternoon when the furniture store was relatively empty, with just a few customers wandering around. OP writes, I had just finished lunch and decided to drop by the store to find a small table for my living room. The old one broke because I accidentally sat on it. I was wearing a light blue shirt, brown khaki pants, and carrying a small notebook to jot down prices. I was near the oakwood table section, checking out a round table priced at $50 when Ms. G appeared. She rolled up with a small wheeled suitcase, probably just back from a business trip, stopped right next to me, stared for a moment, and then snapped, Hey you, bring me that sofa over there. I want to see it. OP was caught off guard, turned around, still holding the notebook, and responded, I don't work here, ma'am. Ms. G frowned, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Don't lie. You're standing here, wearing an employee-colored shirt. You definitely work here. Bring me the sofa, now. OP writes, I stood there, looked down at my shirt, no logo, no name tag, listened to her nonsense, and almost burst out laughing, thinking, all right, lady. You want me to be an employee? I'll be an employee, just not the kind you want. At this point, I was internally screaming, MSG, since when does a blue shirt automatically mean store employee? As the situation escalated, OP decided to dive headfirst into trouble by pretending to be the worst employee possible. OP writes, I shrugged, smiled slightly, and said, sure, let me get it. Then I leisurely strolled over to the massive gray leather sofa, probably weighing at least 110 pounds, took one look at it, turned back, and casually said, that thing is way too heavy. You should go check it out yourself. I can't lift it. Ms. G immediately snapped, her voice rising above the store's soft background music, You're an employee, and you can't even carry a sofa? Get someone else here, I'm not doing it myself. I responded, yeah, I really don't work here. I'm just a customer. Ms. G practically roared, Stop pretending. I saw you working earlier. What kind of useless employee are you? Get the manager now. OP writes, I glanced around and noticed a few other customers watching, an old man testing out an armchair shaking his head, a young woman holding a decorative pillow giggling. I thought, all right, lady, you want a bad employee? I'll give you the worst one yet. So OP leisurely walked around a shelf, pretending to look for the manager, then strolled back 5 minutes later, now holding a small table lamp they liked. OP said, the manager's on break. Also, I don't work here, ma'am. At this point, I was wheezing, OP, you're ruthless, and I love it. Ms. G turned red, practically foaming at the mouth. What took you so long? What kind of employee doesn't know where the manager is? I'm filing a complaint. OP burst out laughing, replying smugly, Go ahead. I don't work here, so I wouldn't know where the manager is anyway. Ms. G, now fuming, stormed over to the customer service counter, her suitcase wheels squealing against the wooden floor, slammed the counter, and barked, Where's the manager? This employee is lazy, refuses to work, fire her immediately. A real employee, a guy wearing a dark blue uniform, glasses, and a name tag that read Fong, emerged from the back and asked, What's the problem, ma'am? Ms. G jabbed a finger at OP, who was now casually comparing prices on the small table and lamp. This one. She won't help me get a sofa and has a terrible attitude. Fire her. Fong blinked, looked OP up and down, light blue shirt, no name tag, and asked, do you work here? OP held up the lamp and said, Nope, just shopping. She made a mistake. Ms. G froze, mouth hanging open. Fong chuckled, Ma'am, she's a customer, not an employee. Nearby, the young woman with the pillow burst out laughing. It was obvious she wasn't staff. This is hilarious. The old man in the armchair added, if she were staff, she wouldn't be carrying a lamp like she's redecorating her house. At this point, I was crying. OP, you just made Ms. G drown in her own nonsense, and you barely had to try. As Ms. G tried to regain her composure, she grumbled, this store is awful. Employees and management are useless. She turned to leave in a huff, only to accidentally knock over a display shelf of decorative pillows. A pile of cushions tumbled onto the floor, one even getting stuck under her suitcase wheel, nearly making her trip. Fong stepped forward to help, giving her a pointed look. Ma'am, please be careful not to damage the merchandise. Ms. G muttered, the shelf was too low anyway, then yanked her suitcase free and stormed out. OP writes, I stood there, hugging my new table and lamp, listening to her grumble as she left. Employees nowadays don't do any work. The young woman with the pillow quipped, next time, pretend to be the manager and scare her off completely. And honestly, OP, you turned a simple misunderstanding into an all-time legendary troll moment. Bravo! What do you think? Was OP a genius, or was Ms. G just unlucky? Have you ever pulled a dive headfirst into trouble moment like this? Share your stories, I need more laughs. Story 5. Next up, we have a tale from r/IDontWorkHereLady, a place where a simple need can turn into a hilarious showdown thanks to a customer's misplaced confidence. This time, the OP shares a drama that made me want to scream, you did this to yourself. OP was just an ordinary person strolling through a home goods store, the kind with shelves full of shiny cookware, the mixed scent of new plastic from vacuum cleaners, soft waiting room music playing from the speakers, and customers rummaging through items while carts rattled over the tiled floor. OP wrote, I stopped by to buy a small trash can for my kitchen, planning to get in and out quickly, only to be mistaken for an employee and dragged into an absurd encounter with a crazy customer. Enter the protagonist of this drama, Ms. H, a self-important shopper described by OP as around 30, long ponytail, tight white t-shirt with yoga pants, tapping on her phone constantly, a high-pitched voice like off-key opera, and an attitude that screamed she was the only person in the store. OP continued. H locked eyes on me, decided I was an employee simply because I was near the trash can section, and demanded my assistance, even though all I wanted was to grab my trash can and go home to clean my kitchen. But Ms. H's sense of entitlement set the stage for a response that had me laughing and shaking my head. This is a story of trash cans, arrogance, and a satisfying lesson. Are you ready? Brace yourself, because Ms. H is about to dig her own grave, and OP is about to make you laugh for the next 30 minutes. The drama unfolded on a Friday morning, when the home goods store was moderately busy with a few customers browsing around. OP wrote, I had just cleaned my kitchen that morning and realized my old trash can had a hole in the bottom from too much hot waste. Dressed in a gray hoodie and ripped jeans, I carried a fabric tote bag for my purchases and went straight to the trash can section. I was checking out a small blue plastic bin, priced at $150 KVND, when Ms. H appeared. She pushed a cart full of items, mops, water bottles, storage boxes, the wheels rattling because they were loose. She stopped right next to me, stared at me, and suddenly shouted, Hey, you! Get me that vacuum cleaner from the top shelf. OP was stunned, turned around, still holding their tote bag, and replied, I don't work here, ma'am. Ms. H frowned, her voice rising to an even higher pitch, Don't lie. You're standing here, next to the trash cans. You're obviously an employee. Get me the vacuum cleaner now. OP wrote. I looked down at my dirty gray hoodie, processed what she was saying, and almost burst out laughing. Then I thought, all right, if she insists, let's play along a little. And honestly, I just wanted to scream, Ms. H, since when does standing near a trash can make someone an employee? The situation escalated as Ms. H refused to believe OP and essentially turned them into her personal assistant. OP wrote. I shrugged and gave a small smile. All right, let me check. I put my bag down, reached up to grab a small red vacuum cleaner from the nearby shelf, and handed it to her. She nodded, as if she had successfully commanded me. Good. Now go get me a broom from aisle 7. Hurry up, I don't have all day. I turned to her, deadpan, ma'am, I really don't work here. I just came to buy a trash can. She immediately snapped, her voice cutting through the soft background music playing store ads. Stop pretending. I just saw you working. What kind of lazy employee are you? Go get the broom now. OP continued. I glanced around and noticed a few other shoppers watching. A middle-aged man holding a pot shook his head. A young boy pushing a cart for his mom giggled. And I thought, all right, Ms. H wants an employee. Let's give her an employee, my way. So, I casually walked off. But instead of heading to aisle 7, I took a detour through aisle 8, picked up a plastic ladle for myself, browsed some discounted food containers, and returned after 5 minutes. Ms. H was standing at the trash can section, hands on her hips, face red with irritation. Where's the broom? What took you so long? I shrugged and held up the ladle. No more brooms. Also, I don't work here. At this point, I was thinking, OP, slow and steady trolling, Ms. H is about to explode. Things spiraled further as OP completely messed with Ms. H's perception of reality. OP wrote. Ms. H turned bright red and shouted, what took you so long, you useless employee? Call your manager here right now. I can't stand this attitude. I laughed out loud, feeling victorious. You can call them yourself, I don't work here, remember? Fuming, she pushed her cart to the customer service counter, its wobbly wheels squeaking all the way, and slammed the counter, yelling, where's the manager? This lazy employee refuses to work. Fire her now. A real employee, wearing a blue uniform with a name tag that said Ken and glasses, came out from the checkout area. What's the issue, ma'am? Ms. H pointed aggressively at me, at that moment holding my blue trash can and comparing ladle prices. This girl is lazy, won't fetch a broom, and has a terrible attitude. Fire her. Ken looked me up and down, gray hoodie, no name tag, and asked, do you work here? I shook my head, lifting my trash can. Nope, just shopping. She made a mistake. OP wrote. Ms. H froze. Her mouth fell open. Ken stifled a laugh and said, ma'am, she's a customer, not an employee. The nearby customers murmured. The man with the pot chuckled, it's obvious she doesn't work here, this lady is hilarious. The young boy pushing a cart even added, employees wear blue shirts. She's in a hoodie, just shopping. And I was internally screaming, OP, you didn't even have to do anything, Ms. H embarrassed herself all on her own. The peak of the drama came when Ms. H tried to save face but only humiliated herself further. OP wrote. Ms. H turned to me and yelled, why didn't you make it clear from the start? You wasted my time, lazy girl. I calmly tapped my trash can and replied, I told you 3 times, but you didn't believe me. You even ordered me to get a broom, how is that my fault? Ms. H, still fuming, turned to Ken. Are you the manager? Fire her. Ken smirked, I'm not the manager, and she doesn't even work here, ma'am. Still refusing to back down, Ms. H demanded, then get me the real manager. A woman in a blue uniform, with a name tag reading knock, emerged. What's all this noise? Ms. H pointed at me again. Fire her. Knock laughed, she's a customer, not an employee. I can't fire a customer. The entire store burst out laughing. In the end, Ms. H stormed off but crashed into a display shelf, sending storage boxes rolling everywhere. And OP? They happily bought their trash can and ladle, went home, and shared the story with their mom, who laughed, if you were an employee, the store would shut down early. Moral of the story? Don't assume. And definitely don't mess with an OP who has all the patience in the world to let you dig your own grave. Story 6. Finally, we arrive at our IDontWorkHereLady, a place where a bizarre situation can turn into peak comedy thanks to a customer's misplaced confidence. This time, the OP shares a drama that made me want to yell, Mrs. J, how did you manage to embarrass yourself this badly? OP was just an ordinary person strolling through a shopping mall during the Christmas season, a place filled with twinkling lights, Christmas trees, the scent of gingerbread cookies lingering in the air, and jingle bells blaring from speakers amid the bustling holiday shoppers. OP writes, I went to the mall to buy Christmas gifts, coincidentally wearing an elf costume because I had just attended a costume party. I never expected to be mistaken for an employee and had to explain myself in the middle of total chaos. The main character of this drama is Mrs. J, a self-important customer whom OP describes as around 50 years old, short golden-dyed hair, a thick fur coat, arms full of shopping bags, a voice as shrill as an alarm siren, and an attitude like she owned the mall. OP recounts, Mrs. J saw me, decided I was an employee because of my elf outfit, and demanded my assistance, forcing me to deal with the situation while crying in my costume. OP simply wanted to buy gifts and go home to rest after the party, but Mrs. J's entitlement set the stage for a hilarious confrontation that had me both laughing and shaking my head. This is a story about an elf costume, arrogance, and an absurd misunderstanding. Are you ready? Buckle up, because Mrs. J is about to ruin her own day with her mistaken assumptions, and OP is about to make you laugh for the next 30 minutes. The drama unfolded on a Saturday evening just before Christmas, when the mall was packed with last-minute shoppers. OP writes, I had just come from a company costume party, dressed as an elf, green tunic, tight red pants, a jingling hat, and pointy shoes, because the theme was Merry Christmas. After the party, I dropped by the mall to buy a gift for my cousin, holding a small gift bag while browsing near a Christmas decoration stall. I was checking out a Santa Claus-shaped light when my eyes started stinging from smudged mascara left over from the party. As I wiped my tears, Mrs. J appeared. She was pushing an overloaded shopping cart full of gifts, toys, and candy canes, which clattered under the weight. She stopped next to me, stared for a moment, and then barked, Hey, you! Get me that big gift box from the top shelf. OP was taken aback, still teary-eyed, and responded, ma'am, I don't work here. Mrs. J frowned, her shrill voice rising, Don't lie to me. You're in an elf costume, standing right here, you must be an employee. Get the box now. OP writes, there I was, jingling hat on my head, mascara running, listening to her demand, feeling both amused and exasperated, thinking, all right, if she insists I'm an employee, let's give her an employee performance. Honestly, I wanted to shout, Mrs. J, since when does a crying elf automatically become a staff member? The situation escalated when Mrs. J refused to believe OP and essentially assigned her the role of a Christmas employee. OP continues, I shrugged, my voice shaky from crying, sure, I'll get it. I reached for the shiny red gift box, my hands trembling from the sting of mascara, handed it to Mrs. J while still wiping my tears. She nodded approvingly, as if she had successfully bossed me around. Good, now fetch me that small Christmas tree from the next aisle. Hurry up, I don't have all day. OP turned to her, still wiping her eyes, and deadpanned, Ma'am, I really don't work here. I'm just shopping. Mrs. J immediately shrieked, loud enough to drown out the Christmas music, Stop pretending. I saw you working. What kind of employee cries this much? Go get the tree now. OP writes, I looked around and noticed a few other shoppers watching, a middle-aged man shaking his head, a young woman taking a photo of a Christmas tree giggling to herself. I thought, all right, you want a crying employee? I'll give you one. So, I walked away, my jingling hat ringing with every step, leisurely wiped my eyes, picked up an extra string of lights for myself, browsed through the snow globes for a bit, and only returned after 5 minutes. Mrs. J stood there, hands on her hips, face flushed. Where's the tree? What took you so long? OP sniffled, holding up the string lights. They're out of trees. Also, I told you, I don't work here. Honestly, I thought, OP, you're absolutely nailing this crybaby employee act. OP kept playing into the mistake, completely throwing Mrs. J into confusion. OP continues, Mrs. J's face turned redder as she shouted, What kind of employee takes this long and cries while working? Get me the manager right now, I won't tolerate this attitude. OP, still smiling through her tears, replied, "Go ahead, call them. I'm not an employee, so I can't." Mrs. J, now livid, pushed her cart over to the information desk, its wheels squeaking under the weight, and slammed her fists on the counter. "Where's the manager? Your employee is lazy and refuses to work. Fire her immediately." A real employee, a young man in a black uniform with a name tag reading "dung" and an earpiece, rushed over. "Ma'am, what's the issue?" Mrs. J pointed straight at OP, who was still holding her string lights and gift bag, eyes still watery. "This girl won't do her job. Fire her now." Dung blinked, looked OP up and down, elf outfit, jingling hat, mascara-streaked face, and asked, Do you work here?" OP shook her head, voice still shaky. "No, I'm just shopping. My mascara's stinging my eyes," and she got confused. OP writes, Mrs. J was stunned into silence. Dung burst out laughing. "Ma'am, she's a customer, not an employee." Other shoppers started whispering. The girl with the phone chuckled. It was obvious she wasn't staff. "This lady is hilarious." The middle-aged man with the gift bag added, "Real employees don't cry. This girl looks like she's in a soap opera." At this point, I was practically cheering. "OP, you made Mrs. J flounder in her own mess effortlessly." The drama reached its peak when Mrs. J tried to save face but only embarrassed herself further. OP recounts, Mrs. J spun toward me, screaming over the Christmas music, "Why didn't you make it clear from the start? You wasted my time, you lazy brat." OP, completely unfazed, wiped her eyes and replied, "I told you 3 times, ma'am. You didn't believe me. Also, I was crying. How was I supposed to get a tree?" In the end, Mrs. J stormed off in frustration, but not before knocking over a display of small gift boxes, sending them tumbling to the floor. As she hurried away, she mumbled under her breath, "Employees these days are useless." OP writes, "I bought my string lights and snow globe, went home, cleaned off my mascara, and shared the story in my group chat. My friends laughed, saying, 'You got mistaken for an employee while crying? That's a new level of talent.' Honestly, this might be one of the best I Don't Work Here, Lady stories I've ever read. What do you think? Was OP a genius, or was Mrs. J just pitiful? Have you ever been mistaken for an employee in a ridiculous outfit? Let me know, I'm curious."